Do you ever catch yourself saying, English is just crazy? Maybe your students come across a tricky word and you tell them, you just have to memorize that one, or this is the part you have to know by heart. But deep down, you know it's still confusing. Here's the truth. English isn't random. It's a wonderfully complex system, and once you understand how that system works, through sound, structure, and meaning, everything changes. That's what Sarah, Paul, and I teach inside Mastering Morphology. This isn't another curriculum. It's deep teacher knowledge inside a practical, comprehensive course that finally shows you how words really work. No more exceptions, no more gimmicks or patching holes with memorization or phonics alone. It's time to go beyond sound it out and give your students the framework they need to truly understand words. So if you're ready to stop guessing and start teaching with confidence, join us inside Mastering Morphology. Enrollment is open now, so we invite you to click the link in the show notes to get started. You're listening to episode 84 of Literacy in Color. Today, we're diving into a topic that can feel overwhelming for a lot of educators, but when done strategically, it has the power to transform reading outcomes for students. And that would be assessment. I'm joined by Dr. Stephanie Stollar and Kate Winn, who are the co-authors of the book Reading Assessment Done Right. In this conversation, we unpack what assessment should actually look like within a structured literacy framework, from universal screening to diagnostics, progress monitoring, and even outcome assessments. They share why assessment can be a powerful tool that helps us move from guessing to targeted instruction. We also talk about some common mistakes schools often make with data, why some assessments should actually be de-implemented, and how the right assessment practices can truly change student trajectories. If you've ever wondered how to make assessment meaningful and actually useful for your instruction, this episode is for you. Welcome to the Literacy in Color podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Sullivan, a science of reading advocate with over a decade of experience as a reading interventionist and literacy coach. I'm passionate about making evidence-based instruction both effective and engaging. If you're interested in captivating our learners on reading fluently and understanding language, or as I like to call it, keeping it colorful, then you've found the right place. Each week, we'll explore intriguing lit bits and practical strategies around the science of reading and structured literacy to help you be colorful and teach colorfully. Are you ready to bring literacy to life? Let's color outside the lines and make an impact together. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Literacy in Color. We are joined by a powerhouse team. We have Dr. Stephanie Stollar, who is the founder of the spectacular Reading Science Academy and also co-author of the wonderful book MTSS for Reading Improvement. And she's joined by her new co-author, Kate Winn, who is also a fellow podcaster of the Reading Road Trip of IDA Ontario. And together they've joined forces to create the most spectacular book, something that is really lacking in the field that has answered a lot of the burning questions people are searching for day in, day out. And they've put together Reading Assessment Done Right. And today we're going to be chatting all about their book. So first of all, welcome to the show. I'm so happy to have you both here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
So Dr. Stollar is no stranger to the Literacy in Color podcast. She's a beloved returning guest, and I'll link those previous episodes in the show notes. But Kate, since this is your first time here, could you briefly share your background as it relates to literacy?
Sure. Well, this is my 26th year of teaching here in Ontario, Canada. I've taught French as a second language, gifted education, and I've taught grades 2, 3, 4, and 5 classrooms, as well as literacy on Rotary in grades 7 and 8, all before moving to kindergarten 10 years ago. So I still teach full-time, and I write and present and train educators and all sorts of fun stuff as well to help spread the word about evidence-based literacy practices.
How did your co-authoring collaboration come to be?
I'll jump in on that one. So, of course,
Stephanie, being Stephanie, had always had in her mind the idea that a book like this needed to exist. And as a teacher, certainly it came to my attention that a book like this was very much needed as well. And I thought, I love writing and was so into the whole science of reading world and devouring all the books about it. And I thought, this might be a great topic, but I thought, I need a co-author, and it's not going to be just anybody. I know who I needed to be. I needed to be Dr. Stephanie Stollar. And I had known Stephanie a little bit through social media, and I was a member of Reading Science Academy, and I reached out, and it was within a couple of hours of me waiting by the computer to see her response that she replied and said yes, that she had always thought of this too, and she would love to collaborate, and that was incredible. And so we hadn't really known each other before that, and did a lot of work with Google Docs and a lot of texts and things like that to work remotely together. But that's kind of how it all came about.
Yeah, I have had this book in my mind for a very, very, very long time. I could hold up the file folder with all the various versions of outlines. And it really took Kate, I think because she is a classroom teacher who's got the assessment bug, right? Like she talks a lot about how it changed her teaching. That really just hooked me, even though it was not a great time for me to be writing another book. Because it was Kate and because I knew that we were lined up in the way that we think about assessment and the power that it has, I said yes right away. It just was an absolute gift. And she was fabulous to work with. And we really did have an easy time, I have to say, in going back and forth and getting our ideas all organized and settled and dividing and conquering to get the ideas out into the book.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes your book particularly special because, Dr. Stollar, you have such experience with assessment and understanding the measures and how they relate to the 5 essential skills and all of this deep, deep knowledge. And yet Kate has this wonderful practitioner lens of what this actually looks like in the classroom and how it affected her kindergarten students. And I think the marriage of both those lenses makes this book especially wonderful.
Yeah, all that deep knowledge about assessment as a school psychologist means nothing if teachers don't use assessment to change their daily instruction with students. I've known that my entire career. So again, that's why hats off to teachers like Kate who really make it a mission to understand assessment and then use it to inform their work. It's the heart of everything it takes to improve outcomes for students.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, I have chapter 8 open in front of me. There was a quote that I really loved. I wanted to pull it off a Post-it, but it says, if you don't link assessment to instruction and intervention, you can all too easily get caught up in learning about teaching new strategies that may or may not meet your students' needs. And that really resonated with me because all we're learning about the science of reading and evidence-based practices, I think we're very quick to jump on strategies and activities that seem like they're really great, and they are great, but we need to be knowledgeable of when to use them, and an assessment really drives that knowledge.
That's right.
So maybe you can share some of the transformational power that comes from not only administering assessments that are high quality and worth our time, but using the right type of reading assessments effectively.
Well, I'll just share the micro level, just an individual student story, just the idea of having the right data. And so a kindergarten student where at the start of the year, they were assessed on letter names and on first sound fluency. And so phonemic awareness was okay, but letter names not so much. And so to be able to work on that alongside the sounds and letter formation in the fall. But then when we got to that middle of year screening, the nonsense word fluency, the correct letter sounds, it was below benchmark. And so I knew exactly what to work on with that student. I knew exactly where he needed to be by the end of the year in order for us not to be worried about reading risk for him. And so I was able to take him and I took him for a few minutes because in kindergarten, you're not going to do great big long interventions, a few minutes every day working exactly on that thing. I used progress monitoring to track the progress to see, okay, yes, what I'm doing is working quickly enough in order for him to meet that goal at the end of the year. And then well before the end of the year, he was already at that goal. And so just the idea of having that powerful information, you're not guessing where is this student skill wise. You're not guessing what should I be working on to help this child become a good reader. You have all of that right there. And you can also see if what you're doing is working, which is really key as well, right? And so just for that one specific student, but when you think about all of us teachers doing this with so many different students, and as you say, the transformative power that it has. But when I just think I've got that specific face in mind where I can just think, okay, we've taken him off that path where perhaps he wasn't going to be a successful reader. And now he is. And I do really think that's powerful.
Yeah, that's great. And I'll just piggyback on that with sort of a systems level example that I work with schools that are on a path to improve outcomes for all of their students. Schools that might only have, 20% or 30% of their students who are on track at the beginning of the year. And they are also learning about and trying to implement the science of reading. And they're seeing all the shiny objects and getting different programs dangled in front of their noses. And they're trying to figure out the right path forward for their students. And having assessment data is like having a flashlight when you go into a dark basement or a dark closet. You could fumble around and eventually find that pair of ice skates or whatever it is you're looking for. But if you have a flashlight, you're going to get there a lot faster. So I love Kate's example with the individual students and magnify that for every student within a school district. We can get where we need to be for students in a much faster and more targeted and then ultimately effective way when we have good assessments.
Yeah, that's such a great analogy. And when we think about past experiences with assessment, rather than just viewing students as high, medium, and low, now we can have more detailed information to make a targeted approach like Kate just described. She knew exactly what to work on at the small group table rather than just thinking, oh, I know this kid needs help. I don't know exactly what to do. And your book gives a clear roadmap on how to tackle the scary numbers that can come along with assessment. And that being said, sometimes when we think about assessment, it can have this connotation that isn't always positive. Sometimes we think about data collection and data analysis as very clinical or scientific or complicated. So within the realm of this book, what do you want educators to understand differently when it comes to reading assessment?
I hope educators will move away from viewing assessment as a hammer that they get beaten up with, because unfortunately, that's what has happened, maybe unintentionally through district efforts at accountability and school improvement. And that's been painful to watch. So I hope that teachers will see through this book how assessment can be a tool that really is in their corner. It's something that can be quite useful for them and not used against them.
Yeah, I would just add, just to echo Stephanie, that there could be this negative connotation, but I think I want teachers to know that we're not just trying to sell them on something like, okay, you need to tolerate this. This is evidence-based, so just go ahead and do it and, be quiet. It actually can make your work easier. It can make your work more joyful. This isn't just sort of like a neutral, you got to do this. It's amazing. It has changed my instruction. It has changed my student achievement. And if you're doing assessment right, reading assessment done right, it actually makes the work easier. It's not some extra add-on. It's not going to make things more burdensome. It's not useless data. It really does make everything better. So I feel like that's really a message that I want teachers to hear.
Yeah, it shouldn't just be this cumbersome box to check. And Kate, I love on social media how you'll share some of your results and say, in the beginning of the year, this was the percentage of students I had below benchmark. And at the middle of the year now, look at the difference. And seeing those huge, huge, huge numbers, it just goes to show when you do have this targeted approach to your instruction based on assessment, the power that can come with that. And I think that having your lived evidence and living proof that this works, I think is a powerful testimony to this work as well. Every teacher's heard it. How do I help my kid read at home? Now, you've got something real to tell them. Reading.com is the only reading app that turns parents into reading teachers, not with games or gimmicks, but with a real phonics-based system that guides them lesson by lesson. It's not a game that keeps kids quiet in the back seat. It's a system that makes parents your partners. And it picks up right where your classroom leaves off. So tell your parents to check out reading.com. Visit reading.com/color for 60% off the annual plan today. When we come to this notion of assessment, you talked about some of these ideas of sometimes teachers feel like they have to tolerate delivering assessment or not using them appropriately. What are some common mistakes that schools often use when they're collecting assessment data and they're not quite doing assessment right?
I would say one thing is probably just sort of lamenting the low scores without taking any action to change anything, right? And sometimes, let's have a 45-minute meeting about Bobby and let's have a 45-minute meeting about Susie, but kind of thinking, okay, where's our tier 1 instruction? What's kind of happening on that first line of instruction? And then where specifically do we need to go from there? And then doing something about it, right? So it's not just sort of wringing our hands and having big long meetings and pulling in all of the adults to talk about it all. It's okay, but what are we going to do? We actually need somebody doing something with these children and we need to track it. So I think sometimes it's just a lot of talk about the data without so much action to improve it.
Yeah, I would say something very similar, that not taking proactive action, I think, is a big mistake. Sort of waiting to see how things turn out or thinking that there's nothing that can be done, and just not scheduling time for those purposeful and targeted conversations where there's a structure to the data conversation. And it's not just that problem admiration that Kate mentioned. We've all been sucked into those useless meetings. So in addition to the time for the assessment, scheduling the time for teachers to get together to talk about their results and to communicate to administrators the resources they need to change the results.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so many people can resonate with those types of meetings, and you really do get sucked in and thinking about one student who perhaps can't perform, but sometimes we need to take a step back and look at the bigger picture and see what can we do about it. There has to be something we can do about it, and moving that information into action is so, so important. And you guys dive deep into all different types of assessment, and maybe we can juxtapose some not so great assessments that a lot of people are used to administering, and that would be running records as kind of an entry point for beginning of the year assessments. A lot of elementary teachers are used to delivering those. How does that compare to a universal screener?
This is one of Kate's favorite topics. So I'm going to let her take this one.
Well, in terms of universal screener, one thing is you're actually going to assess reading with it. Whereas with some of our past assessments, especially at those beginning, whether it's level A and B or level 1 and 2, depending on your publisher, when it's those predictable pattern books, you're not actually even assessing reading. So the screener will be helpful for that. The screener is also helpful because we know that there is research and evidence that it actually identifies risk. So if you are looking into reading risk, you will get that from this. Some publishers claim that their tool does, but we don't have any data on that to support that. And I think another really key one about screeners is assessing the automaticity piece that we know is so important. Because with our past assessments, we did usually assess accuracy. Like we would get a percentage for accuracy. Sometimes we didn't worry too much if the errors were based on certain things, which again is not an approach we want to take. But the fact that universal screeners are almost always, if not always, timed. And so it's not just about the accuracy, it's about the automaticity. And that's a big jump for a lot of people learning wise, because they think, why do we need them to read faster? And I don't understand why we're timing them. But the fact that the automaticity really does matter, I would say that is a really key piece that we're getting out of a universal screener too.
Yeah. And I love how you mentioned that automaticity piece, especially because one of the things that was really special in your book is you tackle these burning questions, that everyone has these burning questions. And one of them was, well, is timing my students going to give them anxiety and something along those lines? And you share research about how it actually doesn't promote that kind of anxious feeling and give reasoning and rationale as to why not. And I think that's one of the nice things about your book as well, is when these kind of sentiments come up right on a sidebar, you're tackling those things along the way as well.
Yeah, we can kind of read teachers' minds, right? We kind of knew like, okay, we hear this question, we hear this. Okay, I know you're wondering about anxiety, so we are going to jump in and answer that question here for you. So we really tried to do that.
Yeah. And then when we think about assessments course, assessments come along a whole continuum. We have ones that would assess reading and risk and others that don't. Can you speak to why de-implementation of certain assessments is just as important as implementing the right types of assessments?
I would say time. Teachers are overburdened with so many expectations and so many things that they have to do every single day that if we just keep adding on more and more assessments, the ones that the teachers have always done, the ones that the previous principal and superintendent required, and now the new ones that the new administration wants you to do, and now the newer tests that the state is requiring, if we just keep adding and adding, then when do teachers have time to actually teach? We have to shed the assessments that are not actually serving teachers in being able to support their students. So I think that's where the de-implementation really becomes so important.
Yeah. And when you think about all this time that's spent on assessing and juxtapose it to how much time, instructional time that you're actually giving students, every minute that you're spent assessing is another minute that you're not teaching them. I think that's why universal screeners are so powerful as well, is because they're so quick. And you think about those traditional running records and gosh, you can sit with a student for half an hour at the small group table and then times 25. Sometimes teachers aren't done with their assessments for a whole month. When we have more efficient means of collecting more beneficial data, it's also logic involved, not just the science.
Absolutely.
Maybe we can dive into some of the meat and potatoes in your book. And I was already telling these ladies that chapter 2 is one of my favorites. It's jam-packed with so much of the essential terminology needed to understand assessment. It's entitled The Nuts and Bolts. So everything that you want to know about assessment is in that chapter. And I was saying I already read it twice and I have it flagged. I feel like this is a reference that I'm going to go back to time and time again as I support teachers. And it's just a must-have reference section that I think is so essential to laying the groundwork for the rest of this book. And I was thinking about maybe what's some of the problems that can arise when teachers and even administrators, educators aren't speaking the same assessment language as you're moving forward and trying to glean some information when it comes to assessment.
Yeah, well, you're my favorite now because you like chapter 2, because it was really important for me to have this information in teachers' hands about some of the more technical aspects of assessment that we don't do a good job preparing teachers around. So concepts about standardization and norm referenced versus criterion referenced assessments. What does validity and reliability mean, and why are those important aspects of an assessment? These are terms that some educators are trained to understand and value, but not classroom teachers. And to really tackle this literacy crisis, we need true collaboration. We need every educator within the school to join together to help solve this problem. What happens when school psychologists, maybe special educators, speech language pathologists are familiar with this terminology and why those aspects of assessment are important to consider, but teachers don't know? Then we can't really collaborate. We're not empowering teachers to be equal partners in the decisions that we're making about students, or even in understanding the information we've collected about students. And I just don't like that. I don't want somebody other than a classroom teacher acting as a gatekeeper. The teacher is the most knowledgeable, the person who is with the students every single day, and the person whose voice should be elevated above others, or at least equal, I'll say, to others. So I've just never liked the fact that there's different information shared in the training of some educators that's different from classroom teachers. So I wanted to give everybody equal information and empower teachers to have a voice in those conversations with other educators about their students.
Yeah. And I just want to say with chapter 2, I feel like I took a course from Stephanie as I read her different drafts. And with some of our back and forth, I was able to contribute more. But with this one, it was like, I'm just kind of taking it all in. And I feel like I need to keep rereading it because someday I will be interviewed or presenting somewhere and someone's going to ask me about chapter 2 and Stephanie won't be there. to be the one to answer the question. So I'm thinking I really need to make sure I learn all of this. But there's a lot that will be new for teachers, but that's the whole point, right? If you're going to get a book, you might as well learn something new from it, and so much value in all of that, data and assessment terminology and everything. So Stephanie did an amazing job.
And I'm really 100% okay if you get to chapter 2 and you say, like, I'm just not interested in learning about that kind of geeky stuff. And you come back to it when you have a child study meeting coming up, or you're about to hear the results from an outside provider who's done an evaluation on your students or something like that. And you feel like, okay, now's the moment I need to dig into chapter 2 so I can be prepared. I'm okay with that.
Yeah. But you make the complex very accessible. And that's what I appreciate about that chapter. And one of the sentiments I loved that you also included is oftentimes when we have these data meetings, when we're talking about students we're concerned with, the classroom teacher will go and smile and nod.
That's been my experience, unfortunately.
Yeah. And so having this background information allows them to also be knowledgeable enough to speak to their students when it comes to data and not just personal anecdotes.
That's exactly right. And I was trying to communicate in that chapter that the data that teachers collect, Kate is a shining example of this, can sometimes be more valuable than what a school psychologist is providing. That looks all fancy and has terminology that's not familiar, that when it really comes down to it, the actionable information that directly measures those reading skills, that is perfectly understandable and clear for teachers to act on, that's what we want to be relying on. That's what we want to lean into anyway. So we want teachers to be confident to speak up in those meetings.
Yeah, definitely. And then a good chunk of your book dives into each individual assessment. So one chapter is dedicated to universal screening and another to diagnostic assessments, and then progress monitoring and even outcome assessments. So maybe we can take a moment to delve into each one, and you can briefly explain the purpose behind that type of assessment.
Sure, I can jump in and do that. So we're going to start with our universal screening. Everyone gets screened, ideally 3 times a year. And an analogy for that one is we think of it as a thermometer at a wellness check. There's no symptoms. We don't know what's going on. We're just going to check everybody's temperature just to see. And so you do that, and we can figure out, which students, which systems might be at risk, and go from there. Then the diagnostic is only for students who need it because we need more information. And the analogy for that would be someone who had the fever, they're at the hospital, we need to know what's going on next. So it's going to be diagnostic imaging, x-rays, MRIs, it's going to be blood work, right? Sometimes the screener tells us enough to know what we need to do next. We've got the question answered because we know what instruction should happen. But often it's that diagnostic for the specific students that will tell us what we need to do instructionally for them. So we're working with these students. We're actually doing something to change their instruction. And then progress monitoring, usually using the same tool, like the same published tool that you would use for your screener, Acadian Stipples, that sort of thing. You would progress monitor with that tool to make sure your instruction's working. So to track it, you can graph it. You've got where they are. You've got their goal. You're going to check in every so often and see where they are, and to make sure your instruction's working. If it's not working, then you can change your instruction and then see if that will work. And so that's how we're monitoring progress for those students. And then the outcomes assessment's a little bit different. The progress monitoring is like the GPS, that's our analogy there. And then the outcomes assessment is kind of like the rear view mirror. So we're kind of done with whatever that chunk of learning was. We're looking back to see, did what we were doing, did it work? And so we can learn valuable information from that to move forward, but it's more kind of like an at the end look back. And so all 4 of those are so key. Not every student is going to have every one of those pieces, but they work together just in an incredible cycle to make sure that we're catching everybody, we're getting their instruction, we're checking in on their instruction, and then looking back to see how it all went.
What a great rundown in a nutshell. That was such a wonderful explanation. And I love your analogies with the GPS and the rear view mirror. And that's a really great way to look at it. And then chapter 8 really is special because you bring so much of that information all together, moving from knowledge to practice. So you illustrate several case studies with practical next steps. You show graphs. And really, one of the things that I loved is how you had that common score patterns and next steps. So showing the different measures on different potential outcomes that students would have had on those assessments and showing them potential next steps for instruction, and then even linking it to other books in the Scholastic Science of Reading and Practice series. Check out this chapter in this book to help you further design your instruction to meet those needs. I thought that was really a nice touch.
The scoring patterns piece is just interesting because I think we showed nonsense word fluency, correct letter sounds as one, and then even oral reading fluency scores as well, where two students can get the exact same score. But if you actually look at the patterns and look at what happened, your next step for instruction is not going to be the same for both of those students. So even just to be able to dig in on that, we thought was going to be helpful for teachers.
Yeah, if you're going to spend time giving good assessments, we want you to really milk them for all they're worth, to get all the possible information that you can. And sometimes the score is just the beginning. The score is important, but there's information beyond the score that tells you about the behaviors of the student that earned that score. And that's rich information for planning instruction. So in chapter 8, we just tried to get at all the different ways of linking the assessment information to your next steps for instruction and provide some structure for that so that people have a way of thinking through from what is the problem? What am I expecting versus what am I actually seeing? And quantifying that in an observable way. And then unpacking, well, why is that problem or gap happening? What's underneath it? What's the root cause of what I'm experiencing in the classroom? And connecting it to good research-informed instruction. So many teachers are buying all of the books in Scholastic's Science of Reading and Practice series. So there's rich information there. And we thought, why not just link directly to some strategies and research-based routines that people have handy on their bookshelf already instead of sending them to some other website or something else. Those were some of the ideas in that chapter that really is about connecting and linking the assessment results to the actions in the classroom.
Yeah, and I also appreciated your advice in how to evaluate your intervention. And you gave some really clear examples of graphs and showing different plot points. And teachers are never really taught how to interpret a graph. And I think it was helpful to see one data point that perhaps went off kilter is not your sign to change up everything that you're doing. And we need to look at more information. And you even gave a synthesis of how we can evaluate our interventions, whether we're looking at instruction or curriculum or environment, and really clear questions to ask ourselves rather than just saying, oh, yes or no, this worked or this didn't work. And if it didn't work, maybe we dig a little deeper instead of just changing everything the next day.
Yeah.
That was really helpful information as well.
Good. That's great to hear. You're absolutely right that we don't provide enough support for teachers to understand how to use the graphed data. And it's a really common misunderstanding that we should evaluate each data point as we collect it instead of looking at an overall trend over time. So we wanted to illustrate some different patterns of how data can look and what that might mean for next steps. Thanks for appreciating those things in the book.
Maybe we can wrap up by thinking about the power of assessment overall and how that can drive action. Do you want to leave teachers with an encouraging or inspiring reminder about putting the data into work?
Well, I can just share, I think, Michelle, you were referring to some data that I've posted online, and it might be the same that I want to talk about right now, is just in Ontario, we have students for 2 years of kindergarten, kind of like a pre-K and a K. And so I have a bunch of students this year that I also had last year. And so when they came in, I used the Acadience Peli, which is a pre-K screener. And so just a couple of data points, 47% of them met benchmark for phonological awareness, 29 met benchmark for alphabet knowledge. So that's kind of where we were starting with those students. And then now in their kindergarten year, middle of year screener, 100% of them met the composite benchmark score. 100% of them for those phonemic awareness tasks, the first sound fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency. 90% of them met the specific benchmark for nonsense word fluency. So to see where we started with those students, to see where we are now, you know that instruction mattered, right? And so for me to be able to reflect and think, okay, this is what worked. My tier one, obviously, this is what was working. I had this data on these students who maybe didn't meet benchmark along the way somewhere. This is what I did for those students. And so just the idea that you can change trajectories, you can change students' lives by using these assessments and tailoring what you're doing. So I think for me, being right there in the classroom, working with these students, that's the most inspiring piece of all.
I love it. That's what I hope for. That's what I've been working towards my entire career in bringing assessment information to teachers, is for teachers like Kate to say exactly what she said. Teachers are the most important variable in the equation of reading outcomes. And when teachers have knowledge about where their students are and where they need to go, and what are the research-based ways to get students there, that's when things come together. That's the knowledge that we need in every single teacher's hands. So well said, Kate.
Absolutely. And what an inspiration. And oftentimes we'll hear about the research saying, by the end of first grade, 95% of students can read proficiently with the right type of instruction. And people will say, well, not my kids, or that's in only certain scenarios. And I think it just goes to show that you didn't start the year with all of these kids already on benchmark. And you did have students that were in need of extra support. And it's the targeted instruction that was the magic wand, not necessarily that you were already given a deck of cards that were in your favor. And I think that's what's really special here, is when we're doing assessment right, this is, our catchphrase. It's almost like this pixie dust, but it's not. It's science into action. And it's really telling to see your results. And I am so excited for anyone who gets their hands on your book, because this can be in the future of many other educators as well. It doesn't have to just be this one-off scenario. It could be everyone's reality if we're taking this kind of approach. So
that's right.
Kudos to you and all of your work as well.
Thank you.
So maybe we can do a fun little complete this sentence. When it comes to assessment, stop blank and start blank. How would you fill in the blank there?
Stop guessing and start taking action. I don't know, something along those lines.
Yeah, I would say something similar. Stop expecting data to magically climb and start taking instructional action to get it there.
There we go. I love it. I think, again, it just goes to show the power of looking at your data effectively, putting that into action. And that analysis is important. And we need to feel equipped to tackle it in order to move the needle. I think your book is a treasure. I think everyone truly needs, it needs to be on everyone's shelves. There's some books that I'm like, oh, this is good for this population, or this is good for this kind of teacher. This book is for everyone. It truly is. And so I hope everyone puts it in their cart, has the opportunity to read it, because it really will make a profound impact on your profession. And with that being said, maybe you can close out by just sharing where listeners can connect with you further and where they can even get their hands on this wonderful book.
Yeah, well, my website is stephaniestollar.com, and you can order the book there. You can also order it from Scholastic, of course. And I'm really interested in connecting with university professors who are perhaps looking for a textbook around assessment. So I'm hoping that this book will be useful in that arena as well. And so I hope people will reach out to me. I have a section of my website where you can see resources related to higher ed. And I hope that this book will be used there.
That would be amazing.
Totally agree. So obviously, if anybody is listening to your show, Michelle, they are discerning podcast listeners, and I would love for them to come find me at Reading Road Trip to check out our podcast there as well. And I post on social media most of my education-related work on Instagram, and my handle is @KateThisMomLoves.
Wonderful. So we'll link that all in the show notes. And I also just have to say, your podcast is one of my tippy top favorites as well. It's a great listen, and everyone needs to go over there and subscribe and have a good listen to your episodes.
I agree.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you both.
Thanks so much for having us, Michelle.
And congratulations again on this wonderful, wonderful book.
Thank you.
Thanks for your enthusiasm about it.
Thank you so much for tuning into Literacy in Color. I hope today's episode left you feeling both inspired and equipped with something new to add to your teaching toolkit. If you're enjoying this podcast, it would truly mean so much to me if you'd leave a 5-star review. It helps other educators find the show and join our colorful community. And don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss an episode. For more tips, tools, and resources, be sure to check out the links in the show notes at michelleandthecolorfulclassroom.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week. Until then, be colorful and teach colorfully.